So, David, I've been asked to do something.
Oh, that sounds ominous.
I'm slightly terrified about it, but a few days ago, my dad was asking me, he's a farmer, he's saying, well, what's all this SFI thing I keep hearing about? And I was like, okay, well, it does this, this, and this. So, right, I think I want to do this, but you're going to have to do it all for me.
You're going to charge him your time?
I would like to try, but I can just see how that conversation would be going. It's a bit like when I was a teenager on the farm being asked to help chuck the tyres on the silage pit. You like the idea of being paid, but you're just going to end up getting covered in crap.
Hi, I'm David Udall, one half of Agonomics with David and Jack.
And I'm Jack Watts, the other 50% of the show.
Together we bring our extensive knowledge of agriculture and economics together for the greater good.
Yes, it's our mission to help you better understand the markets, as it's what we monitor day in, day out.
We also talk about our analysis work.
In fact, that's what we're going to do in this episode.
With this week's launch of the expanded SFI.
That's Sustainable Farming Incentive.
We're going to tell you about the stacking options for arable and livestock farmers,
as well as the SFI actions available for agroforestry.
Please follow or subscribe to this podcast to make sure you don't miss an episode.
New shows drop every Wednesday at midday, and please get in touch.
Comment on any of AHDB's social channels.
Or email us agonomics@ahdb.org.uk.
So this is episode 7 of Agonomics, Jack, which has just flown by. And since the last episode, we got our department together, didn't we? And we were talking about all the ways that we've kind of deployed new comms. And obviously the podcast has been one of the key parts of that. But there's also new, more innovative comms coming from AHDB around the economics side as well. So we're going to be trying new things as the year goes on, which is very exciting.
Yeah, and it's in this new world of kind of hybrid working and everything. It's brilliant to bring everyone together in person. And particularly after last week's episode, we talked about Farm Bench. It's actually great to spend some time with the Farm Bench team talking about what they do. They spend a lot of time out on the ground with farmers, doing their benchmarking and supporting the feedback meetings. It's really, really valuable stuff. And it was great to be able to talk about how we can embrace more and more of that stuff and then use that understanding to drive some of the longer term work that we do as a team.
Exactly. We're putting agonomics into action, aren't we?
We certainly are.
And we're still getting some really nice comments about the show. Stasha from our domestic marketing team in AHDB has been banging the drum and even helped get the beef and lamb buying assistant from Aldi hooked, who said to her that they gave it a listen and there's some really useful info and context in there, especially about the lamb episode, and they've passed it on to their team and saying thanks. So that's a good bit of feedback there from the retailer side, Jack.
Absolutely. And as ever, we've both got a mystery word, phrase, or thing that has no right to be in a podcast about agriculture or economics to slip in somewhere. Try to spot them if you can.
Well, I did a double bluff last week, didn't I? That I put IKEA furniture in there, which was just a completely random phrase, which threw everyone.
Although a lot of people would say I put random stuff in anyway. And so it's easier to spot the stuff that isn't random. I didn't think that was a very kind comment, but there we go. Okay, so in this week's episode, we are going to take a look at the expanded offer for the Sustainable Farming Incentive for 2024. It's timely because earlier this week, applications opened, so to enable farmers to start engaging, have a look at some of the new options and expanded options available. There is an awful lot to digest here, so we thought it would be useful to try and unpack what it all means. A lot of people ask us, how on earth do we deal with this? What do we do? So I thought, let's just have some 5 top tips just to help people understand this complicated landscape and take some first steps towards it if it's something that's not been engaged with before. So I think if you're a mechanic, for instance, this is a bit like saying we're going to work on a Ford Fiesta rather than going straight for the Porsche. So let's take some small steps here in our apprenticeship of understanding what SFI is all about.
So I suppose the first of those is to avoid taking that generic advice, because all of these SFI options are going to be unique to your farm, your business, and your objectives. And you've got to pick and deploy those ones that are going to be best suited to you. So again, it's about taking time to understand what's the best choice for your farm.
And I think it's something that really has to integrate with the farming system, the management of time available to the farm, and overall objectives. And that sort of segues us nicely into the second one, which is all about finding the value of SFI and the various options to the business. And I get a little bit frustrated when we see in the various lists of options, we see the headline payment rate. And some look very attractive, some look less attractive. But what we have to get our heads around is, unlike BPS, we have to understand actually what's the cost involved in achieving those payment rates. And so what we have to do is look at the margin between those two. So if we're looking at the herbal lays, for instance, well, that's fine, but how much is it going to cost to buy the seed, and how much is it going to cost to hire a contractor to plant that? That should be sort of the direct value we're looking for. But also importantly is to understand the indirect benefits that an option may well bring. So what are the productivity gains? So if we're going to be planting a herbal lay, what benefit does that bring in terms of nutrient use efficiency, for instance, and how does that support the productivity of the business? And so that is a much more difficult one, but an important one to quantify in the medium to long term, as well as that margin over those costs.
Definitely. And that kind of links back again to what we were talking about when Julie was with us from our Farm Bench team recently, talking about the details of kind of managing farm business. And obviously, we've got to account for time and labour value that goes into these as well. This isn't just simply, like you said, Jack, about looking at I'm going to get X per hectare and this is the cost of seed, so off we go. There's more depth to it that needs to be worked out. And I think, again, coming sort of our third top tip, to do that, it's around starting at a manageable level and then building up with experience. These SFI options can be built, they can be stacked. So trying to dive in and do multiple options, if you're not in a position as a business to do that and put the time against it, then starting at that manageable level and building up and developing experience and understanding what works on your farm and how it links in with your rotation. These are multi-year options, so thinking about it in a multi-year business planning way as part of the rotation is definitely the key thing to do.
Number 4 is a bit of a boring one, but really important, and that is really about keeping plenty of records, plenty of evidence of the work that you've done, so that you've got that portfolio, and so that you're able to then have that evidence base for an inspection or an audit to say, this is the work we've done.
And the fifth one is definitely not a boring one, and that is to look out for AHDB's ongoing analysis on this area, because we've done a lot ever since the first pilot was released back in 2021, when we had that sort of 900 farms that were going through that. We've done a lot of work looking not only at sort of what SFI means, but the impact for individual farms. We've got a set of AHDB virtual farms that we run the numbers through to see what the actual the business impact is going to be. And we've got some upcoming analysis that we gathered from our recent cereals and oilseeds planting and variety survey about the land use change that SFI has created as well. So, there's always analysis going out. So looking for that latest information to understand all of those options available is definitely the right thing to do.
And I think building on that, so this coming autumn, we'll have a number of our analysts will be presenting at various industry events and conferences, and understanding that SFI and how it impacts businesses and what it means for the industry is going to be a key theme.
And from our point of view, we've got a bit of a release of freedom here, because obviously we've had the general election recently at the start of July. For about 6 weeks before that, we weren't able to kind of maybe talk about these areas because we were restricted by that pre-election period and being a public body of what we can and can't say in those kind of political spheres. But now that's ended, we can open the doors and we can bring our analysis back. And obviously, we've had that change in government. SFI is continuing, but there's always going to be questions going forward, I suppose, from a government policy perspective, isn't there? It's like, are things going to change as we progress through this?
The challenge will be about how the scheme is resourced going forward. We know, it's pretty evident that there is a huge amount of pressure on the budget, and there will be a spending review coming over the hill at some point. Now, that may well be causing some concern. And I think the key thing for the industry really is to not ignore that, but not to catastrophize around it either, and to think about actually, well, how do we give ourselves the best chance of maintaining and hopefully in the long term building this investment by talking about the value that it delivers to the return of public goods. They're notoriously quite tricky to be able to quantify, but really important that we do. Personally, I think there's a real opportunity to get SFI more involved in supporting carbon footprinting. There's huge value to be had there for farm business, but also for broader SMA businesses as well.
So that's our headline intro, I suppose, to SFI. We're going to take a short break now to get the latest on the markets. And then when we come back for the second half of Agonomics with David and Jack, we're going to be talking a bit more about SFI, getting into some of the details and some of the specifics.
If you're in the market for another podcast to subscribe to, then look no further than our Manager's Special, AHDB's Food and Farming podcast. Recent episodes include a consumer insight offering on red meat labels and supermarket aisles, as well as a dairy special about our work with retailers to promote milk. If you're after herbs, or rather herbal lays, our shelves are stacked with sage advice on how to introduce lucerne and clover into your fields. In fact, we cater for all tastes, so you'll find sections dedicated to all sectors: pork, cereals and oilseeds, dairy, and beef and lamb. And don't forget our middle aisle, where you can often pick up a bargain episode you didn't know you needed to listen to. Search Food and Farming wherever you get your podcasts. AHDB thanks you for your custom.
Hi, I'm Olivia Bonser, Senior Analyst at AHDB, with a look at grain and oilseed markets for the week commencing the 6th of January. Despite some support in wheat markets over the Christmas period, prices have been under pressure in the new year from a strengthening US dollar, technical selling and sluggish global demand. However, Russian wheat crop conditions remain in focus, with warmer than usual temperatures and excess moisture in key growing regions. Persistent hot and dry weather in Argentina is also raising concern over the country's maize crop, which is now in its critical development stage. For rapeseed, new crop prices are supported, with doubts over prospects for global rapeseed production in 2025, though forecasts of heavy soybean supplies from South America limit any major price increases. Over the next few weeks, weather in major exporting countries such as South America and Russia will be key in driving prices. The USDA will also release updated global supply and demand estimates at the end of this week. To stay up to date with the latest data and analysis across arable, red meat, and dairy markets, head to hdb.org.uk and click on Markets and Prices.
Welcome back to Agonomics with David and Jack. And in the first half of our podcast, we gave some top tips for farmers looking at SFI. So these were to avoid taking some generic advice, look at what's specific to your business, hunt out that value, make sure you look in the detail, not just the payment rate at the headline level. Start with something manageable and then build up, as well as keeping plenty of records and photographs for the evidence needed, as well as looking out for AHDB analysis. And we finished there, Jack, talking about the government, the political side of things. Short term, as you said, everything is staying as it is. But do we think there's any longer term concerns from a budgetary perspective? The government has a lot on its plate as ever. I suppose the question is, how big a priority longer term is SFI going to be against other things? If there is a spending review incoming, what's the risk that that big pot of money at the end of the rainbow changes significantly?
In the fiscal situation that the government finds itself in, it would be silly to put our fingers in our ears and ignore that there's no challenges over the hill in terms of the budget. I think, though, there is a big case for the industry to make about maintaining and indeed growing that investment. If we could look at the sheer range of environmental public good outcomes that farmers can help deliver, then there's a solid foundation there to build that case. But let's not kid ourselves. There are big things going on, whether it's NHS, it's about education. And so there's much work to be done to be making the case for this investment. But I think it's important that we link back to those baseline objectives that SFI there. So there are three that sit there. One is about the environmental outcomes, which is pretty obvious. I think the important one, though, for me, is about how it supports food production. We often forget that SFI there is, and it's there stated as an objective support food production and indeed support productivity as well.
Yeah, and that's the one I think is the interesting part from my perspective, because that's where we start blurring those lines, I think, in terms of where we try to create this environmentally productive utopia where we're producing food that is completely environmentally friendly and there isn't any impact from it, or are we trying to create something which is driven by self-sufficiency and increasing productivity gains? And that battle between the two is actually going to be the really interesting part of this, because this then links back to food security that we've spoken about briefly before as well, and how it all links in, that there's that bigger package. This is where I suppose agriculture in its purest sense meets the rest of the world and the rest of the economy, and SFI is actually one of those key links between that links those two areas, goes back and forth. So I think that's one, from my perspective, where I think longer term government policy is going to be, again, building all of those things into the mix to decide what's the best way forward and what's the best use of public funds, essentially, to try and reach all of those outcomes. Here's a question though for you, Jack. Improving productivity. Does any kind of government support actually support productivity, or is there an issue with that? Because inherently you think government support, that actually creates inefficiency because people are just getting money. Is SFI going to actually create productivity?
I think it can, but I think it is how it's deployed. And it's not so much supporting productivity of, say, the best fields in the rotation. It's actually going to be used correctly. If we think about some of the legume options, if we think about some of the herbal lay options and how they're deployed and how they're managed, can really, really help not just deliver environmental outcomes, but actually deal with that really horrible field with bad blackgrass, or that field with really poor organic matter that just simply can't get into a friable state for crop establishment. And I think that's why it's important to really look at the farm specifics and target those options at those problem areas. And yeah, it might mean that some of those areas come out of production, but in the long term, actually you're boosting the productivity potential of those areas in the long term. And that's what food security is about. And one of the brilliant things with SFI, in my view, is that it's not creating long-term land use change. It's actually supporting the productive nature of the productive base as well.
So I know there's been that fear that SFI has been taking land out of production, and obviously that would have probably been really heightened because of the weather that we've seen recently. We've had that, prolonged rainfall through the winter into the spring, and then we haven't had a fantastic summer so far. And that's the thing that's been, driving that concern about productive land going out of crop production and out of other areas of production, and therefore just not being used, and those risks. But I don't think actually that's anything that we've seen. And I think as SFI comes into that sort of normality of it being part of people's rotations and being something that's an active tool being used, even though I asked that slightly flippant question about productivity, I'd agree with you completely, Jack. I think it will enhance productivity because it will be a tool for farmers to view their land and their farm and their operation in a slightly different way. And I think it's going to be built in with other aspects of how agriculture is changing to actually give farmers more options so that they can actually manage their farm in a different way and therefore increase that productivity. And we're not saying that English agriculture is unproductive at all by any means. This is probably just areas where there are small gains to be made across the board for a lot of different areas that will add up to quite a bigger, massive an increase in productivity.
Yeah, absolutely. Those marginal gains are going to be really, really important. I think I can confidently say that the changes in cropping output that we might see or land use in 2024, I'm very confident to say that is going to be wholly driven by weather. And actually the use of SFI is actually in response to that weather to try and build resilience and build a response, try and put some corrective actions to what has been and continues to be a pretty horrific cropping season. And it's useful in its own way to do that. I think there's some useful elements in there as well, and it's great to see that DEFRA has been responding to farmer feedback based on the 2023 offerings, and there's some really intriguing options in there. There's an element of support on agroforestry. We know there's a keen interest there as well to understand and explore what all that means. There's more provision for historic buildings to be weatherproof. That is as well. I think one of the options, which might sound a bit quirky, but I think certainly knowing a lot of farmers will want to try and embrace, is this support for educational visits. So bringing school kids out onto farm, something that a lot of farmers feel quite passionate about in terms of driving understanding of the industry and food. And this is where I'm going to probably be a bit controversial and say this is where the difference between being an economist and being an accountant comes into it. If you're an accountant, you say, well, what's the point in that? Because accountants will look at the sheer currency value in something, whereas an economist will ascertain the much broader scope of value. And that's one of those options as well that people will, from a moral point of view, will want some support to be able to do that.
Yeah, and actually, I think that's a really interesting point on SFI overall, that in a way it is intended as a tool that the direct impact of the action is one thing, but it is also intended as a tool that there are positive externalities that are created, and it's trying to create multiple impacts, whether that's on the farm business, on the environment, over the soil, crop productivity, whatever it would be. One choice can have multiple impacts across the farm business. And I think that's why it's really important, coming back to those top tips that we were talking about earlier, it's to look at things that are specific to your business, as well as getting into the detail over time when you start building up your knowledge and your experience of it, to understand those specifics of the value and where it fits into your rotation. And viewing SFI as another crop, essentially, or another commodity that is used within your business, this is something that's a bigger opportunity, I think, than what just a standard area-based direct payment that we had previously is. It's a bigger opportunity to create something that can grow.
I take it a bit further and say actually SFI could be essentially a whole enterprise in its own right to a farm business, and it could be, for a lot of businesses, be the biggest diversification opportunity. Now, diversification gets a really, really bad press amongst some, largely because I think it is misunderstood of what the point of diversification is. It is about having a diverse source of income, not so one enterprise can prop up another from a profitability point of view. Every enterprise in the long term has to be profitable, but a diverse source of income can actually bring some resilience to short-term cash flow. And that is incredibly important, particularly with to farming businesses, because we talk about this roller coaster of commodity cycles and the uncertain income that creates as well. So I think as an industry, as businesses, we can be very, very ambitious about SFI being an enterprise. Let's not be afraid of talking SFI as a profit center for farming businesses to deliver for the businesses, but at the same time acknowledging the public good that's delivering, where the environmental outcomes are the obvious ones. Underpinning food production is another, but some of those social outcomes as well, helping kids learn about different elements. I'm really excited about the educational one. I think it has a huge opportunity socially for kids that don't necessarily connect with the countryside, don't really understand where food might come from, facing into the broader challenge. The other side of food security, which is about how you utilize food, is a big area, the kind of, I guess, outside of the lane for production agriculture to talk about, but a really important area nonetheless of food security.
And I think that's where we as AHDB comes into this discussion, because what we've basically done there in the time we've been talking about SFI is we've just made pretty much every farming levy payer's life a hell of a lot more complicated, because we've just given them a lot of other stuff to think about that previously wasn't there. And I know it's all linked in with how farming business are developing, but one of the key things we've spoken about for a long time is understanding your market and why you're putting these things into your farm business. And all of a sudden we're talking about diversifying across a range of things, and therefore understanding the market and understanding the externalities in terms of what your decision could impact on and the positive benefits just creates another sort of slight veneer of complexity over the top. And I think that's where we as AHDB come in, that we have the time and the expertise to be able to take all of that stuff, all of that potential impact of SFI, and in the recent stacking work that we've published on our website and that we've been putting out as well, that's the aim of that, is to take that complexity and provide some process of understanding, I think, and logic that farmers can follow to help them on their journey of implementing SFI in less farms.
Yeah, the list of options can be on the outset fairly daunting, but take some time to digest them. What ones look the most appealing? What ones are most interesting to you? That's the key thing. It's about what does it return, but what's most interesting, what most integrates the best with the farm physically as well as financially. I suppose one of the things we were very used to under European agricultural policy was a very rigid kind of prescription of you do this and this happens. Whereas this is much more dynamic, much more in the hands of the farmer to actually pick what they want to deploy on their farm, which is great in that you've got that flexibility. On the other hand, though, it can be a little bit daunting because you're kind of venturing into the unknown and sort of taking responsibility for itself.
I like to think, Jack, that your dad is listening to this after asking you that question of should I do SFI, and basically, would you do it for me? And I'd like to think that you've passed the job interview now from doing this, that he's listening to it and thinking, yeah, he knows what he's talking about. I've made the right decision there. That's all right.
I'll keep you updated.
Okay. Maybe we could run that as our own model farm. We'll see how we go. Right. That was our roundup of SFI and everything involved in that. I've got a question for you, though, Jack. Did you get my mystery word? If I'm honest, again, as ever, didn't get yours at all. Nowhere near.
I'm enthused by that because I took us on a little bit of a tangent talking about cars and apprentices and being in the workshop and things. So I was actually Ford Fiesta.
Was it? Oh, nice. I thought that was a really good analogy. Well, I'll be honest. I went for the ultimate double bluff. Right up front, my mystery word was IKEA furniture. So I called it out brazenly right at the start.
Brilliant.
Couldn't help myself.
So thanks for listening. I hope this episode has been useful. As always, I'm always keen to hear from listeners, and particularly on this topic, just because it's such a massive area. If there's any particular areas that people are interested in, feel free to get in touch. The email address is agronomics@ahdb.org.uk.